21 years into South Africa's democracy, and black fund managers in 2014 managed less than 5% of the assets in an industry that's worth between 6.5 and 6.7 trillion rand. This is the MoneyMakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield, and tonight we look at transformation, or maybe a lack thereof, in the sector. Mothobi Seseli is a member of the advisory council of ABSIP, and joining us from our Cape Town studios, Delphine Govender. Delphine Govender is deputy president of ABSIP and founder of Perpetua. Delphine, when did you go on your own? I mean, for years you've been in the corporate sector.
That's correct, Bruce. I left my former employer in 2012, so it's just about 3 years now.
3 years? Have you accumulated massive assets under management?
No, not massive. It's all relative, I guess. So I think when you start a new firm, an asset under management target is not the kind of target you should have in the early years. This is an industry that's all about earning the trust and confidence of clients. And so, as you see with the growth trajectory of most of the large fund managers today, it tends to happen almost exponentially. So this is a multi-decade endeavor, and a short-term AUM target is not one that you should necessarily have.
Okay, but Mothobi Seseli in our Joburg studio, you've got 30 billion under management. I mean, that's a substantial portion of the 5% of assets in the hands of black asset managers in South Africa, isn't it?
Yeah, it could be larger. As Delphine is saying, it's a multi-decade type of endeavor. It's taken us 10 years to get to this level. I would have liked for us to be a little more significant to play in terms of...
Why are you not a more significant player?
I think that it's been very difficult. Generally, look, there's an institutional space and there's a retail space. A lot of black firms generally have not played in the retail space. A lot of us, our training has been in the institutional space. Therefore, when we go off to set up our own firms, our first hunting ground tends to be in the institutional space. And that's largely the retirement fund space. And that has its own battles. There are a number of role players in that space, investment consultants being critical in terms of drawing up investment strategies and advising pension funds or asset owners on who should be considered for management purpose, or who executes the investment strategy.
It's about brand, and it's about brand awareness, and it's about the multi-year approach, isn't it, Delphine Govender? When you work for an Old Mutual or a Coronation or for an Investec Asset Management, you've got the house name behind you. You go into business for yourself, and trustees go, okay, who are these people? And it takes a while to get that trust, I guess.
You know, it's for good reason, because it is something that you're trying to engender as part of the industry, because you really are about trying to explain that you're going to be a good future manager of somebody's hard-earned wealth and money. But I guess in reality, everybody has to start somewhere. And so some of the largest players today were themselves tiny players, you know, about 15 years ago, and were themselves the current, you know, the size of the current day boutiques, but, you know, 15 years ago they were fractional. And it's interesting to see how the industry has changed in the last 20 years during this time. And it's not surprising that the present day subscale firms are predominantly black-owned firms, because it's just a function of the history. And the fact that individuals have had time, individuals of colour have had time now to have been in the industry for about 10 to 20 years and are now seeking to build their own firms for a variety of reasons. And it's really a function of the entrepreneurial cycle. And I guess it will take time for the playing fields to be truly level, but ultimately one has to start somewhere, and at least the access should be equal.
Do you find that access equal? Is ABSIP, I mean, wearing your ABSIP hats now, I mean, from an ABSIP perspective, if you look at 5% of assets under management in a 6.5 trillion rand industry, it doesn't seem all that significant. I mean, sure, it's 5% more than there was 20 years ago, but is it enough?
Well, ABSIP's view is that it's not enough. And I guess the reason is that if you look 20 years down the track, one would have thought, firstly, that majority black-owned firms, like, you know, Mothobi's firm that's been going for, you know, 10 plus years, should be more significant, particularly when you compare it to other firms that have been going for a similar period of time. And the question one has to ask ourselves is, well, number one, as ABSIP, these are the facts, and it's important to put the facts on the table about how small the shares of majority black firms. And then the question is, well, what can one do to change this? Bear in mind that transformation from an ABSIP perspective is about saying, how do we create an industry that's inclusive, that is where the playing fields are are more level about black firms, being able to participate in large mandates, or are they only restricted to participating in allocations for black firms, which doesn't seem as though that will ever become meaningful over time. And if you're really going to transform the industry, you have to have the ability for all firms to participate in all allocations based on merit.
Now, it is about merit and it's about track record. You've got a 10-year track record, Mothobi, and it's a strong 10-year track record as well. The performance, you've got the awards to show for it.
Yes.
Does it take 10 years to build sufficient traction to be noticed? Do you feel that you're finally on the edge of a more significant breakthrough?
It feels that way, yes. And on some days it doesn't. So it kind of differs. It depends on the context. It just for me, as Delphine is saying, or an earlier point, the investment consulting industry and its role in helping bring about change is for me quite a critical one. They're the ones that go out and recommend. I'm not saying that they have not done it, that they have not put us out there, but I'd like to think about it as, or in a three context kind of situation, if you like. The conversation that happens between ourselves, fund managers and asset owners, the conversation that happens between ourselves, fund managers and investment consultants, and then the other conversation. And somewhere there, we lose maybe the truth, because names that should come up on shortlists are not coming up in the way that they should.
Are you suggesting some kind of conspiracy? Is there a deliberate attempt to exclude black managers? Or is there just a deliberate attempt to not include? That's two sides of the same coin.
Okay. I think the industry is very comfortable in hiding behind that thing called risk management. It's just so what we'll put forward is that which we're comfortable with. And what are you comfortable with? You're comfortable with maybe that which looks like you, maybe that which went to the same school as you. But the key thing is getting past that. There's value in other spaces, and there's value in building a much more inclusive system. Ultimately, for me, it's about can we build a sustainable system? At the rate it's going, it doesn't feel all.
Delphine, Govender, does have to be regulated? Do you start to sort of allocating slices of the pension pie, of the retirement industry pie, and saying, actually, you know what, 10% by 2020 needs to be managed by boutique black asset managers with a track record of X, Y, and Z. You've got to have some standards in place, but once those standards are in place, if you're a black asset manager, you should be getting a bigger stake.
Well, Bruce, this is a tricky one, because ultimately we're saying we're 2 decades into South Africa's new democracy, and we would have thought the progress, and from an ABSIP perspective, in terms of how much more transformed the industry should be, would be greater. On 2 levels, by the way, not just in terms of the percentage of assets managed by majority black-owned firms, but also by the number of black professionals that are actually in senior management positions in the large existing firms. So transformation is not just a single lens; it's multi-leveled. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, if this transformation process is not occurring in its own way, then does it need an extra, almost push for it? So it's almost this kind of carrot and stick approach, and perhaps the mechanisms that we've had to date have not encouraged transformation at the pace that it should be occurring. And this is true not just in terms of racial transformation, but also gender. So there's a significant underrepresentation of women.
You are a rare beast in the world of asset management, Delphine, Govender. You are a woman. And there are not that many women in asset management at any level, least of all management and ownership levels.
This is true, and then we have to keep asking ourselves is why. And I think Mothobi alluded to it, and it's partly, and probably quite significantly, almost environmental factors, so to speak. So is the environment not conducive to being, I wouldn't say welcoming, but enabling to women succeeding? Does it become too harsh? And it's two levels, because it's bottom up. It's why are there not more of the very bright crop of extremely intelligent university female students coming into the industry? And those that come, why are they not ascending to the ranks or staying? And so the question is it a top-down factor? Are there issues at a leadership level in the environments that firms create which make it just extremely hard for women to succeed because everyone else in the industry and in the firm is not at all like them? And so they're multi-layer factors, and I think the real issue that ABSIP is trying to focus on is put these topics on the table. Let's be open about them, because unless we're open about them, there's nowhere else that we can actually find solutions. And maybe these solutions involve some sort of policy intervention, maybe they don't. And hopefully firms can get there and the industry gets there on its own, because it sees the benefit to transformation, not just in terms of the fact that we, from an equality perspective in South Africa, but because it actually improves outcomes for the ultimate end clients.
Mothobi, I mean, you're both incredibly calm, reasonable, logical, very responsible debaters on this issue. 10, 15 years ago, ABSIP was a lot more angry. Did ABSIP achieve a lot more when it was angry? Or is a more conciliatory approach, as you two seem to be taking from an ABSIP perspective, the way of the future? What's going to work in this environment?
I think that it gets harder. Look, we've been through the different phases in terms of empowerment where, people go out and partner, but are passive partners to establish businesses. We've built up a track record in terms of learning technically what it takes to run an asset management business. And now we've set up our own businesses. So, we've learned quite a bit.
Yeah.
We're now 10 years old. Global multi-award winning. I'd like to think that we sit in a very different trust position relative to 10 years before. So it should be getting a little easier. I'd like to think of us almost like one of the grandfathers in the space, Argon. We always said that we would judge our success by the extent to which other players believe that it could be done. If you look at the number of players out there that have gone on to set up, I think that in the last 2 years they talk about 18 firms. They're certainly looking at us to advance.
There's got to be an opportunity, but there's got to be an opportunity, otherwise people wouldn't be doing it. So people are seeing a silver lining on this cloud.
Yes. No, let me finish the point. If the granddaddy's at 30 billion, and the industry thinks about an Argon in an incubation sense, I don't know what you're doing incubating this grey hair, right? So their prospects are limited to the extent that you're choosing to incubate an Argon or a Perpetua. She's accomplished much. Delphine, there are a number of others that have accomplished much and should not be incubator material.
Should absolutely be more angry.
So the tone is going to change. Yes.
There we go. The tone will change. Mothobi Seseli, member of the Advisory Council of ABSIP. He's the Chief Executive of Argon. And Delphine, Govender, Deputy President of ABSIP and founder of Perpetua, discussing the soon-to-be thornier issues of transformation in asset management. It's been quite a placid sector for a long time. I don't think it's going to stay that way for much longer. Thank you for watching The Moneymakers. There'll be more tomorrow night. Till then, bye-bye for now.